Okay, hey guys, I am going to read chapter 18 to you now. Don't forget that there's going to be questions below that you have to answer as we go. Make sure that you're paying attention so that you know what I'm saying when a question comes up, because if you don't, then you won't know how to answer the question. You won't get your credit. Also, you have to make sure that you listen to the whole thing all the way to the end for your score to be entered into Schoology. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and get started. When we left off, um, Billy was heating up the coon skins and alternating them on his grandpa's feet, and they'd gotten the two coons out of the hollow tree, and the one coon the dogs went after up the steep bank. Right? Just before dawn, the storm blew itself out with one last angry roar. It started snowing. A frozen silence settled over the canebrake. Back in the thick timber of the river bottoms, the sharp snapping of frozen limbs could be heard. The tall stalks of wind cane looked exhausted from the hellish night. They were drooping and bending from the weight of the frozen sleep. I climbed out of the deep gully and listened for my dogs. I couldn't hear them. Just as I started back down the bank, I heard something. I listened. Again, I heard the sound. Papa was watching me. "Can you hear the dogs?" he asked. "No, not the dogs," I said. "But I can hear something else." "Well, what does it sound like?" he asked. "Like someone whooping," I said. Papa and the judge hurried up the bank. We heard the sound again. It was coming from a different direction. The first time I heard it, I said, "It was over that way." "It's men from the camp," said the judge. "They're searching for us." We started whooping. The searchers answered. Their voices came from all directions. The first one to reach us was Mr. Kyle. He looked haggard and tired. He asked if everything was all right. "Yes, we're all right," Papa said, "but the old man has a bad ankle. Looks like we'll have to carry him out." "Your team broke loose and came back to camp about midnight," Mr. Kyle said. "This really spooked us. We were sure something bad had happened. 25 of us here have been searching since then." Several men climbed down the bank and went over to Grandpa. They looked at his ankle. One said, "I don't think it's broken, but it sure is a bad sprain." "You're in luck," another one said. "We have one of the best doctors in the state of Texas in our camp, Dr. Charlie Latham. He'll have you fixed up in no time." "Yes," another said, "and if I know Charlie, he probably got a small hospital with him." Back in the crowd, I heard another man say, "You mean that Latham fellow who owns those black and tan hounds is a doctor?" "Sure is," another said. "One of the best." Mr. Kyle asked where my dogs were. I told him they were treed somewhere. "What do you mean, treed somewhere?" he asked. Papa explained what had happened. With a wide-eyed look on his face, he said, "You mean to tell me those hounds stayed with the tree in that blizzard?" I nodded. Looking at me, he said, "Son, I hope they have that coon treed, 'cause you need that one to win the cup. Those two Walker hounds caught 3 before the storm came up, and when it got bad, all the hunters came in." The judge spoke up. "I'll always believe those hounds knew that boy needed another coon to win," he said. "If you fellows had seen some of the things those dogs have done, you believe it too." One hunter walked over to the broken snag. "3 out of one tree?" he said. "No wonder, look here." That old snag was half full of leaves and grass. Why, it was a regular old tree den. Several of the men walked over. I heard one say, "I've seen this happen before. Remember that big hunt in the Red River bottoms when the two little beagle hounds treed 4 coons in an old hollow snag? They won the championship too." "I wasn't there, but I remember reading about it," one said. "Say, I don't see Benson," Mr. Kyle said. The men started looking at each other. "He was searching further downriver than the rest of us," one fellow said. "Maybe he didn't hear us shouting." Some of the men climbed out of the gully. They started whooping. From a distance, we heard an answering shout. "He hears us," someone said. "He's coming." Everyone looked relieved. Mr. Benson struck the washout a little way above us. He was breathing hard as if he'd been running. He started talking as soon as he was within hearing distance. "It scared me when I first saw them," he said. "I didn't know what they were. They looked like white ghosts. I never seen anything like it." A hunter grabbed Mr. Benson by the shoulder, shaking him. "Get a hold of yourself, man," he said. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Benson took a deep breath to control himself and started again in a much calmer voice. Those two hounds, he said. I found them. They're frozen solid. They're nothing but white ice from the tip of their noses to the ends of their tails. Hearing Mr. Benson's words, I screamed and ran to my father. Everything started whirling around and around. I felt light as a feather. My knees buckled. I knew no more. Regaining consciousness, I opened my eyes and could dimly see the blurry images of the men around me. A hand was shaking me. I could hear my father's voice, but I couldn't understand his words. Little by little, the blackness faded away. My throat was dry and was terribly thirsty. I asked for some water. Mr. Benson came over. He said, "Son, I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I didn't mean it that way. Your dogs are alive? I guess I was excited. I'm very sorry." I heard a deep voice say, "That's a heck of a thing to do. Come running here saying those dogs are frozen solid." Mr. Benson said, "I didn't mean it to sound that way. I said I'm sorry. What more do you want me to do?" The deep voice growled again. "I still think it was a heck of a thing for a man to do." Mr. Kyle took over. "Now, let's not have any more of this," he said. "We have work to do. We've been staying here acting like a bunch of school kids. All this time that old man has been lying there, suffering. A couple of you men cut two poles and make a stretcher to carry him." While the men were getting poles, Papa heated the coonskins again and rewrapped Grandpa's foot. With belts and long leather laces from their boots, the hunters made a stretcher. Very gently, they put Grandpa in it. Again, Mr. Kyle took command. "Part of us will start for camp with him," he said. "The others will go after the dogs. Here, take this gun," Papa said. "I'll go with him." Looking at me, Mr. Crow said, "Come on, son. I want to see your hounds." Mr. Benson led the way. "As soon as we get out of this cane," he said, "we may be able to hear them. They have the coon treed in a big black gum tree. You're going to see a sight. Now I mean a sight. They've walked a ring around that tree, clear down through the ice and snow. You can see the bare ground." "Wonder why they did that?" someone asked. "I don't know," Mr. Benson replied, "unless they ran in that circle to keep from freezing to death or to keep the coon in the tree." I figured I knew why my dogs were covered with ice. The coon had probably crossed the river, maybe several times. Old Dan and Little Ann would have followed him. They had come out of the river, and with their coats dripping wet and the freezing blast of the blizzard had done the rest. Nearing the tree, we stopped and stared. "Did you ever see anything like that?" Mr. Benson asked. "When I first saw them, I thought they were white wolves. My dogs hadn't seen us when we came up. They were trotting round and round, just as Mr. Benson had said. We could see the path that they had worn down through the ice and snow till the bare black earth was visible. Like ghostly white shadows, around and around they trotted." In a low voice, someone said, "They know that if they stop, they'll freeze to death." "It's unbelievable," said Mr. Cow. "Come on, we must do something, quick." With a choking sob, I ran for my dogs. On hearing our approach, they sat down and started bawling. They were bawling shrieking. I noticed their voices didn't have that solid ring. Their ice-covered tails made a rattling sound as they switched this way and that on the icy ground. A large fire was built. Standing my dogs close to the warm heat, the gentle hands of the hunters went to work. With handkerchiefs and scarves, heated steaming hot, little by little the ice thawed from their bodies. "If they had ever laid down," someone said, "they'd have froze to death." "They knew it," another said. "That's why they kept running in that circle." "What I can't understand is why they stayed with the tree," Mr. Benson said. "I've seen hounds stay with a tree for a while, but not in northern blizzard." "Men," Mr. Kyle said Mr. Kyle, "people have been trying to understand dogs ever since the beginning of time. One never knows what they'll do. You can read every day where a dog saved the life of a drowning child or laid down his life for his master. Some people call this loyalty. I don't. I may be wrong, but I call it love, the deepest kind of love." After these words were spoken, a thoughtful silence settled over the men. The mood was broken by the deep growling voice, and I had heard back in the washout. "It's a shame that people all over the world can't have that kind of love in their hearts," he said. "There'd be no wars, slaughter, or murder. or greed or selfishness. It'd be that kind of world that God wants us to have. A wonderful world. After all the ice was thawed from my dogs and their coats were dried out, I could see that they were all right. I was happy again and felt good all over. One of the hunters said, "Do you think those hounds are thawed out enough to fight a coon?" "Sure. Just run 'em out of that tree," I said. At the crack of the gun, the coon ran far out on a big limb and stopped. Again the hunter sprinkled him with bird shot. This time he jumped. Hitting the ground, he crouched down. Old Dan made a lunge. Just as he reached him, the coon sprang straight up and came down on his head. Holding on with his claws, the coon sank his teeth in the long, tender ear. Old Dan was furious. He started turning in a circle, bawling with pain. Little Ann was trying hard to get hold of the coon, but she couldn't because of his fast circling. Old Dan's feet flew out from under him and he fell. This gave little Ann a chance. Darting in, her jaws closed on the back of the coon's neck. I knew the fight was over. Arriving back at camp, I saw that all the tents had been taken down but ours. A hunter said, "Everyone is in a hurry to get out before another blizzard sets in. Papa told me to take my dogs to the tent as Grandpa wanted to see them." I saw tears in my grandfather's eyes as he talked to them. His ankle was wrapped in bandages. His foot and toes were swollen to twice their normal size. They had turned a greenish yellow color. Placing my hand on his foot, I could feel the feverish heat. Dr. Latham came over. "Are you ready to go now?" he asked. Snorting and growling, Grandpa said, "I told you I wasn't going anywhere until I see the gold cup handed to this boy." Turning to face the crowd, Dr. Latham said, "Men, let's get this over. I want to get this man to town. That that's one of the meanest brains I've ever seen, and it should be in a cast. I don't have any plaster of Paris with me." The hunter who had come by our tent collecting the jackpot money came up to me, handed me the box. He said, "Here you are, son. There's over $300 in this box, and it's all yours." Turning to the crowd, I said, "Fellows, I can always say this. On this hunt, I've seen two of the finest little coons I had ever hoped to see." Oh, the judge said that. Turning to this crowd, he said, "Fellows, I can always say this. On this hunt, I've seen two of the finest little coon hounds I ever hoped to see." There was a roar of approval from the crowd. Looking down, I saw the box was almost full of money. I was shaken all over. I tried to say, "Thanks," but it was only a whisper. Turning, I handed the box to my father. As his ruffled hands closed around it, I saw a strange look come over his face. He turned and looked at my dogs. Some of the men started shouting, "Here it is!" The crowd parted and the judge walked through. I saw the gleaming metal of the gold cup in his hand. After a short speech, he handed it to me, saying, "Son, this makes me very proud. It's a great honor to present you with this championship cup." The crowd exploded. The hunters' shouts were deafening. I don't know from where the two silly old tears came. They just squeezed their way out. I felt them as they rolled down my cheeks. One dropped on its smooth surface of the cup and splattered. I wiped it away with my sleeve. Turning my dogs, I knelt down and showed the cup to them. Little Ann licked it. Old Dan sniffed one time and then turned his head away. The judge said, "Son, there's a place on the cup to engrave the names of your dogs. I can take it into Oklahoma City and have it done, or you can have it done yourself. The engraving charges The engraving charge has already been paid by the association." Looking at the cup that seemed that far down in the gleaming shadows, I could see two wide blue eyes glued to a window pane. I knew that my little sister was watching the road and waiting for our return. Looking back at the judge, I said, "If you don't mind, I'll take it with me. My grandfather can send it for me." Laughing, he said, "That's all right." Handing me a slip of paper, he said, "This is the address where you should send it." Grandpa said, "Now that that's settled, I'm ready to go to town." Turning to Papa, he said, "You'll have to bring the buggy, and I wish you'd look after my stock. I know Grandma will want to go with us when there's no one there to feed them. Tell Bill Lowry to come up and take care of the store. You'll find the keys in the usual place." "We'll take care of everything," Papa said. "Don't worry about a thing. I don't intend to stop till we get back, 'cause it looks like we're in for some more bad weather." I went over and kissed Grandpa goodbye. He pinched my cheek and whispered, We'll teach these city slickers that they can't come up and beat our dogs. Come up here and beat our dogs. I smiled. Grandpa was carried out and made comfortable in the back seat of Dr. Latham's car. I stood and watched as it wheezed and bounced its way out of sight. "Well, I'm harnessing the team," Papa said. "You take the tent down and pack our gear."